It's a high-tech conversation
and a low-tech topic.
live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bench.Talk 101. After great demand and many requests, we bring back the topic talks again with Craftsmen on Canvas Part 2. So this week, as in the poster that I sent out, a classical oil painting by George Forster in 1816, which depicts an English joiner's workshop. This painting, if I share the painting, it'd probably be best, so you can all see it. And here's the painting. So we've got painting by George Forster. Can you all still see it? So this painting, if you can see, you've got some really old sort of. You can really see what the craftsmen's workshops were like back in the 1800s. I guess without further ado, I'll pass over to everyone else to sort of start picking the painting apart as we did last time.
You know, I was studying it earlier and I was intrigued by what looks to me to be a saddle maker's vise hanging underneath that round basket on the left side above the window wall. Does anyone else have any idea about what that vise is?
Are you talking about this up here, Chester?
It's a leather worker's vise.
Yeah, it's otherwise called a saddle maker's vise for working leather, is it not?
Let me zoom in further and just help people who are on smaller devices to see.
Perhaps it isn't. Perhaps it's just a yoke.
Yeah, it looked like a stitching pony from afar, but
Right.
I think it's really just, or it's you know, those scales with the hook.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, below it maybe. Yeah, hard to say.
Yeah, but it looks like a stitching pony. Yeah,
that's what I thought.
It's down and to the right. Looks like an outline of a violin, doesn't it? Or something like that. Hung up. There's a saw just hanging in front of it.
Yeah, where the saws are at.
Yeah, like a shape
Oh,
of,
yes.
of a violin. Which
Yeah, it looks like the bottom of a violin.
But it's
Or a pattern. Maybe a pattern.
Yeah, it's a pattern for tracing the outline of the instrument so that it can be cut out.
Yeah.
The detail on that saw to the right next to the dividers is really exceptional. You can even see little teeth.
It's an enormous back saw, isn't it? There, really long one.
Yeah, miter saw.
Are they all chefs?
Yeah, that's what I wondered with those hats.
Well, it did intrigue me. Did intrigue me about the hats actually.
I think they
definitely somewhere that it was the traditional what joiners wore in those days, cocked paper hats.
Yeah. But it looks very
I
odd.
think we should bring back the custom and we should all wear our paper hats to vote for Bench Talk 101.
Even if it's not Christmas.
We'll use the ones after Christmas.
We'll just spray them white and reuse them.
Well, what you need to do is get a pattern for the folding.
Do we know the year of this painting?
1816.
1816, but it's by George Forster. However, from my research, no one actually knows who this George Forster is. There were two George Forsters, I believe both were born in Germany, but this one is most probably a British George Forster, who we can't, who I couldn't anyway from my research find out who this George Forster was.
But is it subject of? Sorry, what was the title again? Is it an English work?
It's an English joiner's work. So English Joiners at Work by George Forster. It's an oil on canvas painting.
And Nicholson benches there, which Richard would be.
Well, if I remember correctly, Richard has this this painting itself in his profile picture on Instagram. I was hoping that Richard might have some insight if he's here with us tonight.
Obviously not.
No, maybe not. Well,
He's here. He's here.
Do you mean Richard Arnold?
Yes, Richard Arnold.
Yeah, he's here.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's all right. The host had muted me. Yeah, I've been studying this photograph for years. It's got a lot of interesting features. Like you say, the Nicholson bench is very typical of an English bench throughout the 19th century. But when you consider these benches look quite old in the photo, so they probably have an 18th century origin anyway. So there were probably English general joiners were using this bench probably through a good part of the 18th century. If you'll notice, one of the things that I often talk about is like how things were held to the bench. There are no holes in the tops of these benches whatsoever. And I find very little reference to English joiners using a bench holdfast. So my theory is that they were probably using what they call a bench knife, which you wouldn't really see in the detail on this because they're so tiny, but I can't think of any other way they would have held work down to the bench other than pushing it against the two stop, which is there, yeah. But
the two gentlemen in the picture in the foreground, so the one on the left is planing a flat panel on the bench, not in the vise. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right, so if we, Trenick, can you go to the front of his panel? Is he on the stop then?
Yeah, I can, that's one thing I could know. I can never quite work out because it almost looks like the bit of wood's overhanging the bench, which doesn't make sense.
It
It
does look like it is. And I have a feeling that it could be that it's in the vise. But it doesn't look like it because if you look behind.
Yeah, no, it's in from the edge of the bench. So I don't quite know how he's holding, whether that's a bit of painter's artistic license going on there or not. I don't know.
I think when you look closer, though, if you look when you zoomed in on the bit just above the vise, it kind of the end of the plane. The end of the plane, you see the black shadow on the piece of wood. Maybe that's another something else on the end of it, but the plane maybe that stops at the end of the piece of wood. Where
could it be a block of wood that he's just nailed down onto the bench as a planing stop?
Be bad to plane it that as a planing stop. I think that the brown line is the edge of the board, and the shavings are hiding the edge of the board in front of the plane.
Okay, I mean, sometimes if you're playing if you don't have the stop set high enough and you're playing a bit too enthusiastically, your piece of wood can jump off the stop and shoot forward. And maybe that's what we're seeing. If you look at the expression on his face, he thinks so.
But it's interesting to note, though, that all the boards that make up the top there seem to be staggered. I mean, it's just not a diagonal, but they're actually staggered.
Yeah, they're of
the ends
different lengths.
Of the boards of the top are staggered.
I'm convinced that what he's actually got here is some sort of planing stop that's clamped in the vise.
Could well be, yeah.
So it may not be fully L-shaped. It may just have a block. So if I can try and sketch this on. It may just have a block somewhere here or something which is connected to this board.
Can you go back to the front bench, Rennick? Because that looks like it's got an empty one of them.
Yeah, so that's actually got a planing stop in it.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see the planing stop quite clearly. It's just a black square.
I reckon the painters had a bit of a mare there, because that piece behind the vise must be the back apron.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't clamp anything in it. That can't be clamped into it. The white, the light colour, I think, should be the dark colour, or the.
I think it's just the way the light's falling on that bit from the window, isn't it? That's brighter.
Yeah.
And
if you look at behind his butt,
Yeah.
The piece of wood he's planing is sticking further along the bench, so he's planing onto the bench rather than in the vice. And I think
but
that
the other
apron is just a different colour.
The other anomaly there, and I'm probably going to get shot down in flames here, but that looks to me like some form of jack plane or triplane, and the shaving's coming out like a jointer.
I think maybe he's jointing a piece of wood that's clamped in the vise, and we're just seeing a board that happens to be lying on the bench behind where he's working.
Could well be.
Yeah, if it's in the vise, that'll be the lighter piece that you're talking about, which is actually notched over the leg, as the apron would be.
Ah,
I think
good
we
point.
can. I'm convinced that it's artistic. I think it's poor art. I think.
Is that plane a Razzie plane?
No,
it looks
I don't think
smaller
so.
in the back than the
No,
front.
I think it's just a standard English. If you look at all, Razzie planes didn't really exist in England until the late 19th century, early 20th century. It wasn't an English tradition. None of the other planes on the bench are Razzie in style. It's interesting to note, one thing I was going to say was people worry about how thick their bench tops. Look how thin their bench tops are.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have seen traditional benches, original benches, where the tops are just planed out of inch board. They weren't as fussy about having really thick, heavy tops as we are today.
But Richard, from your experience, have you seen more wear near the above where the legs of the bench are? So they would have done their chisel work over the leg to really ensure the
Yeah, if you were doing any chopping exercises, you'd do it over the section, directly over the leg. Yeah, I do that myself today. I mean, my bench tops are about 2.5 inches thick, but when I'm doing chopping dovetails or doing any downward chopping work on the bench, I always position myself over the legs as such. But it's solid as a rock. But I don't think I want to go quite that thin with my bench tops. But it's probably more about economics. And you'll often find that these benches, it's a job to tell, but they often only have the apron on one side. The back side wouldn't have an apron at all. And we were often pushed up against the wall, up against the window, but these are obviously out away from the window.
I wonder, is there another vise at the other end of this bench on the far side? We don't get to see that, do we?
We don't. No. We can't see anything there, but I'm not convinced there is anything. But what I was really intrigued by when I zoomed into the vise there, when we were looking at the bench top, I sort of noticed the vise, and the screw on the vise is actually offset, so it almost gives you I forget what the style of vise is called, but where it's got a completely open throat.
There would have been a wooden bearer at the other end, the same as my bench that I use today. You can't really see it, but there would have been a timber mortised into that cheek of that vise that would run into a square hole.
I think the rear bench has an offset, also has an elongated face.
Yeah, they both do. And
they're just typical horizontal English vices. This is something else that intrigues me. Obviously, at some point during the 19th century, they started to have vertical leg vices. Why they went from horizontal to vertical, I'm not quite sure, but
it was a French influence with Roubaud, wasn't it?
Possibly, yeah. I don't know. We're not usually influenced by Frenchies, but I'm also intrigued what the third joiner's doing. I've always presumed he's sharpening a saw.
He's having a cup of tea.
Well, I think you could be right on the basis that what you're seeing here does look like potentially it is a saw.
He's working at that sort of height, and from the action, the way his arms are, I would say he's probably sharpening a saw.
Yeah.
And I've recently been reading, let me just get it. I can't remember the title. One of the Mortis and Tennant's first books they produced, The Joiner and Cabinet Maker. I don't know whether anybody's ever read it.
Yep.
But the chap who wrote that was written in about 1839 or something like that, I think. But he was saying that the joiners often sharpen their saws twice a week. That makes you think, really. So, you know, they were probably constantly sharpening their saws, which is another reason why it's probably depicted in this painting.
Yeah.
But I think what's hanging on the wall also gives you another good indication of like a typical English joiner's shop. They were doing all sorts of things. Like you say, there's a violin. I don't know whether it's a violin back or whether it's a pattern for a violin. They obviously had a bit of a musical thing going on. I think the wooden case that's hanging above the door is probably an early violin case as well. That black there, yeah, I think that is probably an early pattern of violin case. So they obviously did a bit of musical instrument either repair or making in this workshop. They're obviously making a lot of picture frames. The thing that's lacking is any finished articles in the painting, really, apart from a few chairs hanging in the rafters.
Yeah, and this is doors. There are doors in the rafter as well.
Yeah, on the right. Yeah, there's some paneling, either shuttering or doors in the ceiling.
I don't notice the chairs that you're speaking about. Are you talking about just above the door on the right hand side?
Yeah. Look, there's a splat back chair hanging in the ceiling there,
and a ladder.
Just about make it out. I'll probably zoom in a bit more. There you go.
Yeah. They're hanging upside down in the rafters.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, it's not upside down. It's the way up, actually.
The right way up.
Yeah.
Levitating.
Yeah, it's probably just hanging on a couple of nails or whatever. So whether
They're
that's
hanging on
a
that
repair
crossbar.
or whether they've made it, I don't know.
Actually, zooming out, I think the artist has actually tried to depict something that might be holding them. It's hard to make them out. So let me just draw over where I think they are, and then I'll remove it. I think the artist has tried to draw something here, and if I clear that and if I zoom out, you might just be able to make that out. I don't know if the quality is good enough.
I don't know. A lot of natural light in the workshop as well. Notice natural light was so important. They don't know anything other than maybe a bit of gas light or some candles. So natural light was very important. A lot of window light coming in. It's a shame we can't see the rest of the workshop, but.
What intrigues me is the lack of apprentice in the workshop, or apparent lack of apprentice in the workshop.
Well, except that the guy in the back has a different vest on than the guy in the front. One may be an apprentice and the other one a master, with the black in the front and the white in the front.
That's possible.
Could be lots of reasons for that. The apprentice could be out with one of the other tradesmen fitting something in the village or something. It's and I think we're only seeing a small part of the workshop here. When you look, there's steps leading up to another door there. I'd say we're probably only seeing half of the workshop. And it looks like there's further room out where the guy is doing the saw sharpening, if that's what it is. It looks like there's more room out there. Somebody obviously going on site, because there's a bass with the end of looks like a triplane sticking out of it on the floor there. Interesting that the sawhorses are just like, they're not joined up, they're just stick sawhorses, as I call them. I don't know what the official term for that is.
Staked.
Staked, that's it, staked, yeah.
But they're very, they seem to be very quick and dirty sawhorses that work. You know, functional sawhorses, nothing pretty about them, they just work.
And it's notice his cabinet, they've both got joiners' chests at the end of their benches that they're obviously storing their tools in.
I didn't notice that, actually.
They've both got black joiners' chests at the end of their benches.
You can see one there, and then you can see another one just behind.
Yeah. And a few moulding planes and a bracing bit on the bench there, obviously. So it's all quite familiar stuff, really. The hammer, can you zoom in on the hammer? I've never been able to zoom in on that properly.
Looks
on the
like
bench.
it has a peen on the back and a regular.
Yeah, that's what we call an Exeter pattern or a London pattern hammer, which the modern equivalent is a Warrington, but earlier hammers had a bit of an oval handle. You can see the ovalness of the handle, and it's sort of like a step down peen, which is what we call an Exeter or a London pattern.
Look, reminds me a lot of a cobbler's hammer or a planishing hammer.
Sort of, yeah.
It's interesting that the planes have all got open handles.
Not all of them. The ones at the back have got closed handles. If you look very closely, it's only I've been trying to work out what the lengths are likely to be of those. The one at the back I can't quite tell. The second one from the back is obviously a jointer. That's of considerable length. I'd say the next one is a triplane, and if that is a triplane at 22 inches, I'm thinking that the foreplane or jack plane at the front there is probably shorter than what we're familiar with, which is an earlier feature. That's probably around 14 inches instead of the 17 inches, which you sort of see more regularly in the later 19th century.
Richard, maybe not now, but I could probably take scaled measurements for you.
Yeah, it's difficult to know really, unless you knew what exactly, but I would imagine that's probably about a 26-inch jointer at the back, and then a 22-inch try, and maybe about a 14-inch floor or jack plane. I mean, the ones on the back wall there's, obviously that's a jointer at the end, and then there's all sorts. Nice, interesting way of sort of storing them as well. They obviously didn't put their main planes away at night in their boxes. We're talking about the saws hanging on the back wall. The smaller back saw, if you just below the violin back, if you look at that, that's quite an early saw. I would imagine that was an 18th century saw. It's got a rounded end to the handle, the grip there, rather than sort of continuing out along the back. And notice how tapered it is in its length, which is another 18th century feature. So that's probably quite, as opposed to the larger tenon saw on this side, which is more, that's probably quite a modern saw at that point.
Is that some sort of charts or something on the wall behind that saw? There's two different, looks like posters of some sort.
Yeah. It looks like print on them almost, doesn't it?
Yeah.
OSHA regulations.
I doubt there was much health and safety going on in that work.
It's got to be the Kosh data.
So what's the estimated date for the D handles on the saw?
Well, what I was just discussing. That one on the smaller sort of back saw there, like I say, that's 18th century. I would sort of put that date of that one at about somewhere around 1770, maybe like that. So that might have been kicking around. It's obviously been sharpened quite a bit, so that's quite an old saw. Whereas the other long back saw, that's sort of more typical of what you'd see, say, in the Seaton chest or a little bit later. So that's, I mean, it looks sort of quite pale in the handle and new. I would say that's quite a new acquisition of about that period that the painting was done in 1816. The hand saw hanging in between them looks like it's probably similar to what you'd see in the Seaton chest, so anywhere around 1800, I'd say.
I was just wondering the difference between the open handle, like you see on tenon saws or dovetail saws, versus the D handle you see, Distant and everybody else has been using. How far back does the D design go on the longer saws?
Quite a long way. I mean, that sort of closed D handle was definitely being produced probably 1760. It's probably some of the earliest ones I've seen. So yeah, they weren't always open handled. I mean, like Jim was making that reproduction, some of the early ones were more of a pistol grip, but we don't really know a lot much before about. In actual fact, the trade card, the John Genyon trade card, shows a closed D-handled handsaw with a very rounded handle, similar to that back saw that's hanging on the wall. So, and that dates from about 1730, 1740. So the closed handle was around quite early.
So the back end, if we were open to go to Diderot and look at some of the saws and tools there, that would give us then a point of which from 1620s, 1630s, somewhere in that range is Diderot.
Yeah, I think we've got to be careful about sort of mixing up English saws and French saws and continental saws. I'm just trying to think what Joseph Moxon saws look like, what he got in his plates. I'm just having a quick look. I can't remember how he shows his saws.
Yeah, my Moxon
with open handles, if I remember correctly.
I'm just trying to find the relevant page.
So that's 100 years earlier.
Yeah. I mean, it looks more like it's going to be more of a pistol grip open handle. Or, yeah, he doesn't show anything like what we've got as a modern saw.
Wasn't there a conversation about this on the presentation we did with Shane Skelton about the White family coming up with the design of the modern, if inverted commas, modern English saw?
Yeah, well, when I was saying that about the close handle going back to about 1760, that was I was thinking of. There's a good example in America somewhere that dates from about 1760 that was found in a roof somewhere. I think that it's a very rounded sort of bit like the one hanging on the wall there, and it's sort of fixed together with rivets rather than the brass steel nuts. But yeah, that's definitely a close handle. So we know they were doing them then, but I'm sure in the Genyon trade card, a minute.
The reason why I ask is because when
on the Genyon trade card, he's got a handsaw with a closed D-shaped handle, and that dates from about 1730, 1740. So they go back quite a long way.
Because the first handles I made for my saws back in the 1990s, I did the pistol grip versus a closed D.
Yeah.
And there's a modern blade on it, but
this trade card it's dated 1737 to 57. So
yeah,
eldest there, but yeah, the top.
Yeah, you see that handsaw. Yeah,
the top left-hand corner has got, and that's actually almost equivalent to the one in the seat and chest in design, with the except for it doesn't have the flat bottom, and but from a point of view of a double horn, and also the thumb indent at the top, they're all exactly the same. It's what does differ is as you know is the bench planes. And the bench planes on that bench are very much more modern than.
Yeah,
I think they're new.
Funnily enough, there was a handsaw sold on eBay yesterday of that pattern. Somebody won it for 20 quid along with us. They were really old, rusty saws, but it was local pickup only, and it was miles away, so I couldn't bid on it. But somebody picked up an 18th century handsaw yesterday on eBay, without a doubt.
Behind the guy in the forefront, on his where his backside joins his back, above that on the bench, they're moulding planes in a row, aren't they?
Yeah, there's a few moulding planes stacked up there in a row.
Looks like 3 or 4 there.
It almost looks like the one at the back is a dado plane as well. It looks like it's got a front upright wedge.
Right, that's why it looked like there might be 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a Sheffield pad brace as well.
Yeah.
Which must have been fairly fairly new.
Yeah, I mean, they started to appear, probably the oldest one I've got's probably around 1770. But that's, you know, I don't think there was many around till about 1800, really.
Well, one of the things I noticed, we were talking about whether or not we can ascribe any artistic license to any of these paintings, and we obviously had, we were treated or spoilt by Dürer. But if you zoom Schrenek in on the pad brace itself, you can actually see the where the indent is, where the rounding of the center of the brace, and he's gone to that much detail to show that drop where it.
Oh yeah, he's painted it pretty well, really. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I can see the moulding planes. Definitely, I'd say that's definitely an upright wedge on the backwood. So he's got a dado plane on the bench there, as well as some moulding planes. Interesting to note things hanging on the wall. If you go down a bit, Schrenek, there's a long case clock movement hanging on the wall as well. So they were probably making clock cases as well. If you go sort of up a bit, sorry, I don't know.
That also looks like a plumb bob.
Top there, it's an arch top, long case clock movement hanging in the rafters at the top there.
I spotted the fact that there were two squares and a T-square.
Yeah.
And that's the only marking tools that we see. But then you can also see a clamp just to the right of the T-square.
There's a marking gauge on the rear bench.
Marking gauge on the
rear bench.
Yeah.
Yes, there is one. Just yeah, I can see it there. But there aren't. What I'm pointing out though is that we can't see many marking tools, and it, you know, these days that we use engineering squares and so on in woodworking for real precision. It just intrigues me that they managed to make wonderful pieces without.
Well, we don't know that these people made wonderful pieces.
Is full of marking.
That's very true. That's very true. It could just be functional, not have a great form.
There's not many chisels out in the benches either.
Well,
no chisels.
No chisels on the bench, but if you look in the background, just on the wall
along the rack,
I don't think that's a chisel.
They might be screwdrivers. That there looks like a pig sticker. If you just look,
yeah, that's a pig sticker.
That's a pig sticker there. It's got a really chunky handle on it. Probably more rounded than the pig stick than most pig stickers that I've seen.
I'd say that was a pad saw over on to the right of the frame that's diamond shaped. That's up to the right. Yeah, of that. It looks like a pad saw to me.
Yeah.
Then, or even or it could be a saw set.
Can you see that molding plane just tucked away behind?
Yeah, yeah.
And
it's interesting. I said there's not much finished work in there, but it actually now looked a bit closer. Now you've zoomed in. There could be a couple of sashes stacked at the back there. I think they're window sashes.
Yeah, they could be. But
or picture frames.
It's very contradictory in terms of what they're producing in this workshop. They've got a chair, they've got doors, they've got windows, they've got sashes there. But then
I think that's one of the beauties of it. This is just showing you the reality of an English woodworking shop of that period in a rural setting. We tend to think of people specialising. Back then, in a rural setting like that, they would have done anything and everything.
Well, all the planes, the bench planes that are stacked on their backsides on the left-hand side of the back guy, against the wall. Can you zoom in on those, Schrenek? Because they should be able to be.
Richard, do you think a rural setting would require such formal garb for a shop like this?
I think that was just standard, normal garb. You're talking about the paper hats were very standard. All the joiners seem to use them. That's a very standard hat. And I think the clothing wear was just what they would have worn at the time. I don't think it's particularly formal, to be honest with you.
Is that a glue pot?
Yeah, that's a cast iron glue pot. Yeah. And I mean, the thing we can't see in the workshop, which they would definitely have had come winter, come summer, there must have been a fireplace or some sort of stove somewhere to keep that warm. So, like I say, I think we've got to be a bit careful with saying there's not many marking out tools. We're only seeing a small corner of the workshop. What was on the other walls, on the other two walls, we have no idea.
I did like the frame saw, the coping saw. Looks like a coping saw because of the thin blade.
The bow saw.
The bow saw, yeah.
But it looks like a very thin blade on that. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that people often forget, that the modern coping saw didn't arrive. I mean, Chester, when did the first American coping saws get made?
Oh, I would guess probably late 1800s.
Yeah, but to say, you've got to remember that sort of prior to 1870, there was no such thing as a coping saw. So
I'm very curious about what's outside the workshop. That looks like a tree that's had its branches cut.
It's a pollarded willow by the looks of it.
Yeah, it does. And then below that, just next to the workman, you can see it. What looks like potentially a pile of logs.
Yeah,
it's very hard to tell what it is.
Yeah,
well, it looks to be an open barn as well.
Yeah.
What is
someone was storing wood underneath that?
What's that roof made out of? Would that be tiles?
That's tiles, yeah.
Yeah, clay tiles probably.
Or could it be thatching?
No, it's terracotta. It's terracotta tiles.
Terracotta,
yeah, it's terracotta tiles.
Sorry,
was that typical for England?
As to where it was.
Asbestos plates, surely.
Yeah, asbestos. Yeah, it's corrugated.
It's corrugated steel, surely.
Too old to be asbestos.
Corrugated iron.
But if you look down, you were talking about the clothing. These are the +4s or culottes, similar to the naval ones. If you look at the shoe, they're the buckle shoes, and the actual they're stockings. Okay, so they're the buckle shoes of a naval. You see on naval ensigns.
Well, that's a civilian shoe. For the clothing reenactors, the brogan and that kind of such, that's for slogging around out in the fields. But when you're in, that would be considered a late 1700s civilian shoe for being in town and around. And he has knee breeches, and that would be of that time. Because
with stockings.
Yeah, and then stockings underneath. You have a garter set to hold them up, and the layers of clothing is exactly what we would do today. You go out camping or whatever, you put your different layers of clothing on. They're right now down to their working clothes. If they went out of the shop, they'd put an over jacket on.
Yeah.
And this is the area, like my clothing for period is if I go out of the shop and I'm not working, I would have to put my overcoat on. Otherwise, it would be either a long vest or a short coat, depending upon the weather, how hot it is or how wet it is. It would depend upon, that would determine whether your fabrics were going to be linen, cotton, or wool. If you're working near fire, you'd be using wool and leather, because wool will especially if you're dealing with sparks and that kind of such, you would be using wool because the lanolin in the wool smothers the ember. Whereas if
if you look at the other guy's foot,
yeah, he may have buckles. They have buckles.
Yeah.
In fact, you can buy that shoe with a buckle today. Here in the United States, at least.
I think they're just bowed. I think they just tied and
bowed, and that's not a buckle at the front.
Yeah.
No.
Now it's zoomed in. Now it's zoomed in. It looks definitely like a bow. Yeah, agreed.
One thing that I was been thinking about, and I said the paper hats were traditional. I mean, I've been taught that through various things in TAF's magazines and what have you, and they always demonstrate making the paper hats at TAF events. But why paper hats? Because am I not right in thinking that paper was an expensive commodity at that point?
Yes, you're right.
Paper is expensive all the way up until the 1860s when modern cellulose-based papers come in.
Yeah, this is before that.
From linen and cotton lump.
Yeah, I don't understand why they would have used paper hats then. Why would they use paper hats?
Well, so Richard, it
Yes.
probably would have. I just, from my novice knowledge at least, I would probably say that because it's it can hold its form better than fabric can. So it has that crisp sharpness that you can see, but also because the papers compared to the papers that we have today were much thicker. They were much more flexible. They didn't rip as easy. They didn't rip and tear as easily.
Here's what's happening. That's cloth, and it's highly starched.
I reckon it was, yeah.
And the reason why you starch it stiff is so when you wash it, the dirt adheres to the starch and allows you to wash the cloth and then reform it after you restarch it, and then you fold it.
Well, that's why you starch your shirt collars, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. Your detachable shirt collars and cuffs for the same reason.
Well, it says in 1630, another picture entitled "De fins chapeaux de papier à vendre," fine paper hats for sale, dates from 1630, and that these were used by different trades, and they were made of paper in England.
And paper was pretty much disposable from the early 1700s on.
The paper cap is first found in English in the late 17th century in the writings of I lost it, but the workman's hat. There's a history on it.
Yeah.
So I think that they are paper. And maybe paper wasn't that high commodity at that time. Maybe that was something that there were paper producers, because there's paper on the wall. All those could have also made them out of the old
disposable.
Well, that was it too. You would make it. You could get the folio size paper in the form of newspapers, and so that can be also another source. However,
well, and there's all sorts of things that are made of paper on the wall. There's at least 3 of them there. So, and they're large. One is large enough to make a hat.
But you notice the hats are 2 different colors. Now, it could be the painter's thing, but it could they did have color differentiation based on who you were and your hierarchy in the shop. The thing is,
could it also just be that one's slightly older than the other and has been wearing his hat for longer? One's got a newer hat, one's got an older hat.
Sure, why not? I mean, it's all we're blowing in our thoughts and interpretations of this. So sure, yeah. I think also the thing though with starch is very relevant in the trades. When we're working out in our period costumes, and in those days your clothing was considered your costume. Today it's a clown costume or whatever, but back in those days the use of the word costume meant your clothing or your outfit. That they could be cloth, they could be paper. Who knows?
In this book here, it references this painting, and it says there is an illustration which reproduces an 1816 painting by G. Forster of an English woodworking shop. 2 of the carpenters in this painting are wearing paper hats, which in this case have not been flattened at the top. Before that is an illustration of a printer or another person that's sawing with the same hat, but it's flattened. So it creates a square at the top.
Right. They're different folding patterns, and they had those things printed up somewhere. But you do the same thing with cloth if you're going to make a cloth hat. I use a cloth hat, and I don't like starch. So my cloth hat has to be washed in a modern day convenience.
Can I just ask, why did they need hats? Were they treating their hair with oils or something? Was it a fashion at that time to oil their hair?
Well, let's see.
Keep sawdust and all sorts of things out of the hair. And indeed, I think it was quite common in that period to grease down your hair.
That's what I'm thinking. I understand they're trying to keep sawdust, but if you just got natural dry hair, it wouldn't be that much. It's not that much of a problem to me now. That's why I was wondering whether it was a fashion then to have heavily oiled or greased hair, which would be a pain in the arse if you were getting sawdust in it.
And also that you couldn't just jump in the shower and wash it out.
Yeah.
Richard, I was just going to say, I was thinking
it was more of a project than it is for us.
Yeah, true.
There's a huge thing online about this. I mean, many studies, but one of them says, however, there are few advertisements from upscale hat makers, blah, blah, blah. It must be noted that the paper hats made during the Regency were probably not made from newspapers, as were the later pressmen's hats. These hats were made of plain white paper without any printing.
Okay. Well, you could get it if you had a shop.
Furthermore, it references occupational costume. Yeah, it references another book, Occupational Costume in England, from the 11th century to 1914 by Phyllis Cunningham. And it goes on more about those paper hats.
The thing is, everybody's wearing hats in those days. You know, they were smart. They kept the sun off the brain. They allowed the sweat to be gathered at the forehead rather than dripping into your eyes. There's a reason to wear that kind of, paper absorbs moisture and it evaporates moisture, so it keeps the forehead cooler. The concept of cancer, the word cancer and carcinome, those are Greek and Latin words for crab. And if you have ever watched how the crab eats, that's the wasting disease that they call cancer. They knew about it back in those days. A person's your body color, if your skin is non-tan, then you were considered an upper crust. If you were bending over the fields and forgot to wear your hat, you were known as a redneck. I mean, all these kind of scenarios deal with how people clothe themselves. They didn't have the modern day conveniences of central heat and air conditioning and all that kind of such. The layers of clothing had bodily functions. You put cotton close to your body because it wicks away bodily sweat. You use linen for finer levels of clothing, but it was still an organic fiber that absorbed. Hemp is also. When you start getting into your outer clothing, like I said earlier, you cottons and linens, unless you worked around fire, and then and that would be cooking, smithing, or any of those areas. Even they call it their bib and apron.
Tucker.
The apron or the front clothes was used to protect the underclothing. You don't own a lot of clothing back in those days, so you protected it. And so that's why starch was used in a lot of clothing treatment, was so that you could easily get rid of dirt and not cause the fabric to deteriorate as part of the washing process. If you only have 3 shirts, 2 pair of pants, and 1 or 2 vests, and maybe 1 or 2 coats, one was always saved for going to church. The other one was when you were working. And so, their point of view is so totally different than ours. As what I'm seeing there is really cool. The guy that's closest to us, he's got a short jacket on that he's wearing. And the guy with the dark vest, and because he has a slightly darker hat, it could be a shadow, it could be the artist thing, but I bet you one of those guys is the master, and I'm thinking it's the one with the dark, either that or it's the guy with his back to us. And I think
the master's probably the one.
I think he's wearing a hat too.
Right, with the with the short time that we have left, I'm going to move on to the second picture that we've got. Chester, you sent in a picture. You were the first one to send something in. So I'm going to share a picture that Chester sent me. Chester, I'm sure you know a little bit more about this than I do. So
well, this is called a close shave, and it's an etching that a signed etching that I have, or rather a lithograph. And the oh, you can't take an original picture and go like that and make it bigger. I'll have to get a magnifying glass. Although on the bottom left, it should have the artist's name.
It does, but the picture quality is not good enough to be able to zoom in and read it.
I like the Dalek.
So I'm hoping, Chester, maybe you can talk a little bit more about it.
Well, I bought this at an auction. It's by E.A. Wright of Philadelphia, and it's called A Close Shave. And it's from, the date on it is 86, but the real year, it'd be hard to say, but it's an interesting piece. The shave is massive, the piece that holds the work in place. And I love the shape of the shave underneath it, of the angled piece. And I don't know exactly what he's working on. He's got an adze on the upside down barrel in the back. And there's some other things on the bench, but I just loved the piece, so I bought it. It's been hanging on my wall in here for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, but I don't know a lot about it.
What intrigues me is the barrels. You've got one barrel just behind the Craftsman, but then there's another one on the right-hand side, which seems a lot narrower. And I'm not sure
that's not a. I think that's two upside down ones, and they're more like for fruit barrel or gathering.
Possibly, but then on top of the barrel on the right, there's a hammer.
No, I think it's an adze.
Is it an adze?
Yeah, it's
right.
like a bowl adze.
He looks like a white Cooper. I think the one where the adze is resting on looks a lot like a butter churn.
Oh yes, it does. A big one.
Yeah.
Is he not making hoops?
That was what I was thinking, because the main barrel looks like willow hoops, not metal.
Well, I was wondering if he was making something splitting off for doing weaving, because look how long that piece is. It goes all the way around.
Yeah.
So like basketry.
Yeah, but that was the idea why I think he's a white Cooper. We call them white Coopers in Austria. Those are not working with oak or chestnut, but with spruce and fir, and are making dairy containers. So for
there's that video, Anton. There's that video, isn't there, of the recently
the white Cooper, yeah.
Yeah, and he was the last one in the farm and all that. And
bullshit, they still work.
Yeah, but he made he made baskets, and he made churns like that, and he made barrels and everything like that, all on a shave horse like that.
Yeah, in European or Central European Germanic tradition, Coopers were split in black Coopers, which were working with oak and chestnut, and white Coopers, which were working for mainly dairy containers or baskets for carrying stuff and things, but they were working with spruce, fir, and other, conifer woods.
One of the great things about this litho is, I don't know if you can notice, but there's a actual coloring to his shirt, which is a sort of a bluish gray.
Yeah.
And then there's also a more of a sienna of the on the brick. So there's that little feature in that litho where they actually did other inks to bring out those colors in that area, and the play of light coming in the window is really phenomenal.
It's tinting, isn't it? It's called tinting.
Yeah.
It's like, because when the early photographs, they were tintographs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's tinting, and
It's
it would
a
be
litho.
burnt sienna.
Chester,
Yes.
on the bottom right of it, there looks like to be 4 numbers, which I presume are a date.
2286.
Sorry?
2286.
So number 22 of 86 prints, or no?
Possibly.
Catalog number.
Normally those numbers are put on the left, but in this case, the artist's name is on the left,
Yeah.
and the numbers are on the right.
But the numbers are printed, or are they with pencil or something?
No, they're printed in very small, the same lettering as the artist's name.
Okay.
And the same thing about the title. The title at the very bottom just says a close shave.
Probably the printer's inventory, or the sales, a sales inventory number or something like that.
My wife is suggesting that the shirt is of a Scandinavian style.
Or Slavic.
Slavic.
It looks more Eastern European to me, but yes.
Slavic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Russian, Polish.
If you
And
follow,
obviously this shop was cleaned up for this. Or you're saying this is a painting?
No, this is a lithograph.
A lithograph from?
On stone, printed from stone.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah, no, I understand that.
It is an artistic thing because its shop is too clean.
Yes, this is not a photograph.
Very good though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those red bricks are red bricks, aren't they? I mean, that's
Yeah,
the most, that's the one that grabs my eyes, the bricks.
Well, this workshop has the fireplace that we were talking about was missing from the last one.
Yeah. And the play of light coming through the window on the bench and then going across onto the brick into his face draws you perfectly.
Right.
if you follow, look at his chest, it looks like he's got one of those little safety bibs hanging down, a wooden piece of wood that if you're working with a draw knife, sometimes I've seen old timers wearing something like that on the chest. Can you see it in the middle of his chest as a shadow line?
Yeah. Could be another piece.
It could be that, or it could be the plaque of the shirt.
Yeah,
that's but he's on his lap.
Looks
massive. Oh yeah, you're right.
That's
you're
a smock or
I think he's got a piece of fabric draped across his lap to just to keep his lap cleaner.
Yeah, there looks like something is across his lap. And if you look closely at the shave, it has a wooden handle.
Right.
Yeah, but I think just going off the shape, I think it's a piece of fabric rather than a piece of wood. And I think it's just there to catch shavings and keep his clothes cleaner.
I wasn't meaning his lap. I was meaning right on his chest.
I think that's the clothing that he's wearing. I think that's where the buttons would be.
It looks massive for clothing, for cloth.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting if it actually does the golden ratio. Of a composition. Does it fit with the dividers?
Just zoom back and I'll check.
Fennick, show the whole thing. I think that his face is actually correct also for the golden ratio, or his chest is pretty much there.
His body, the front of his body is exactly 1.618 from the right hand side of the frame.
Yeah, and there's
like that.
And the perspective on it is wonderful. There's something behind that barrel on the left side, but the direction of movement with him doing the draw knife goes from that lower right section through him and then up into that darker area. I mean, it's really got a nice just movement to the whole picture.
Yeah, it looks like the framework of the back wall.
Well, that clamping block is something else.
Right. And then look at the foot, the pedal, how it almost has a curve to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what Paul said though there, the clamping block is almost overkill for the size of wood that he appears to be working
this,
on.
this
Well,
is
I'm
Not going
a
to
really
move.
regular shaving horse for Central Europe. So they look like this.
yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
Still
And he
do.
wouldn't only be using that bench for doing those little pieces.
Delicate things, no, but also
He would be doing all the staves and everything with that.
Anton, do you think that he's probably a European woodworker who's obviously moved to America?
The fireplace looks really overseas.
I
But
don't-
considering time frame, migrant from somewhere, so the fireplace doesn't look European at all. Too massive.
Right. Okay.
Too much waste of power.
I couldn't find anything on the art.
The fireplace looks just like one of the ones we've got in the cottage here.
Yeah, exactly. but not Central European. We had to keep warmth.
Have you checked the
Well, that's where
cupboards?
You got all your cooking gear would be in there. So all the metal work for how high you keep your pot from the fire and reflector ovens. He's got a small fire banked in the back, but
he's got
It actually looks like there is a little bracket or something. If you look at the top line of the fireplace, there is a little thing just off center.
It could be an indoor contraption for bending the staves. Since he's doing rather small scale work, could be he's bending the staves of the barrels of the churns of his containers in that fire. That would be a right size for what he is standing around here.
He might be soaking the wood in water and then bending it over the fireplace.
Just because the artist was from Philadelphia doesn't mean that the depiction couldn't be Eastern European or English or. I mean, I never thought that the outfit he has on never appeared to me to be particularly American.
No, it's not.
No,
it's an overshirt. It looks very up the front. It's kind of like this thing. You have a slightly large head area to get it through. Then you have maybe a button or two in the top. The rest of it is just
No buttons.
no buttons, because then you don't have anything to catch on or pop or snag when you're working with tools. All the shirts from the 1840s and earlier, unless you're formal wear, it's basically like a pullover overshirt.
The cut of the shirt is very similar to the shirt I would wear, the linen shirt I would wear to my lederhosen.
I'm intrigued to know as to where the workshop is. I presume it's on the ground floor with the heavy brick hearth. But it's interesting that it's still a floorboarded wooden floor. You would have perhaps expected that to be more of an earth floor being on the ground floor in a workshop. And it's interesting that the boards are all different widths as well.
Yeah, all very rough hewn, very rough sawn.
This is an artist's concept. So but in our shop, we had actually below the boards is half concrete and half dirt. That's been it's adobe brick that's been walked on. There's a lot of dirt. Anyway, we put a subfloor, and then we have large boards in the shop. And the reason is, if you drop a sharp tool, I'd much rather not have to sharpen that tool. And so it goes into the wood and saves it. So it's also warmer. And
is that his hat on the bench near the fireplace? Is that a hat, like a cloth hat or something?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Could be.
Oh, you can't really tell. It looks like a hat, doesn't it?
It's the human eye wanting to make something out of what it is.
But that's obviously another adze or hammer.
It's the face of Elvis.
There's another handle there, and I think they're lids for barrels or churns.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
They could be patterns, yeah.
Just above that, in the shadow behind the window, there's what looks like it could be a plane handle or a saw handle or something sticking out just behind the window. You see a little bit of the windowsill where the light is coming in, and in the shade behind that, there is what looks, there looks like it'd be some sort of what could be a tool handle of some kind.
I think you can see that there's a shelf or something there, and it's
exactly probably the prolongation of the windowsill or something.
Maybe
no, I think you're right. I think it probably is a tool of some.
I think it's a saw wedged in a slot. There's two. There's the
you're right.
Then there's a slot, and you know, similar to where they had the slots on the other painting, where they had all the chisels and everything.
Yeah.
If that saw is just resting in there,
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a saw there. It's a wonderful wonderful piece of artwork there, Chester.
It is so accurate.
Going back to your ads, it's not actually an ads. If he is making trussing hoops, it's a Cooper's trussing ads. Though appearing to be every version of the Cooper's ads, this tool is not an ads at all and has a blunt, thick pane instead of a cutting edge, used for beating on or knocking off truss hoops, which are used for drawing the staves together as an alternative to using the Cooper's hammer.
Is that a strap handle then?
Yeah, I can see how that's used. If you pick it up and take it from the ads side, which it isn't, the non-ad side, not the hammer side, and you just tap it down, you can knock the willow rings down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you could do both, but normally the rings were set down with a wedge and then a hammer. But the far side looks to me like a cutting adze of some sort and curved.
It does. When you look at the Coopers, there's notching adze, nailing adze, and a sharp adze. There's numerous different adze that the Cooper had used. And
Andy,
for what he's doing there with trussing, that's where I'd lay the actual name of that adze as a trussing adze.
But if you look at the ads, if you look right at the back, you can sort of see a lighter coloured line, which almost looks like it's been painted. Or sorry, Chester, I can't remember what you said this was.
Lithograph.
Right. Yeah. It looks like there's a shiny section on the cutting edge of the ads.
A bevel,
basically.
Inner bevel, which is what
it's interesting also because the hoop is not flat, it's a round hoop.
Yes.
So
I think it's a half bark, round half stem willow. But also, if you paid a bit more money, you'd get it without the ads.
Nicely done.
I think you have to pay less money because that's ads on it.
On that note, cheers everyone. Thanks for a great bench talk.
Cheers.
Been a great evening. Thank you very much, everyone.
On the bench.
Cheers.
Cheers.